I'm talking with Rob Tillett. He's an astrologer from Australia and an early adopter on the internet with his Astrology on the Web website. And I met Rob just recently on a forum on Facebook, and he and I were we were allies of sorts in a very long debate about the ethics of astrology, and it felt like Rob and I were on the same page on a lot of things. So I wanted to have him on the show, and I just want to say hi and welcome to Navigating the Astrological Matrix, Rob.
Well, thank you, Robert. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Great. Good to have you here. And one of the things that I generally ask people when we bring them on the show, or I bring them on the show, is the one thing that unites us is that we're astrologers, and we love astrology, and at some point in time, we get turned on to it. And, that's different for every person. So I'd love to find out, when sort of the light went off in your head and said, hey, astrology, this is kind of cool. Maybe I should get into this more.
Okay, well, when I was about 21, which is in prehistory, I had a very serious motorcycle accident, and I was wrapped up in plaster for about 6 months. And prior to that, I'd been quite skeptical about astrology, and I decided to look into it to see what it was all about. And then I found that it started to make sense. So I began to look at my own chart and the chart of people I knew, and from then on I became pretty involved, to the extent where eventually I started the Astrology on the Web website, and since then I've been doing nothing but astrology.
So
I did have a few periods of actual professional astrology prior to that, but nothing. Well, that was before astrology was available on the personal computer, and it just took so much time that I figured I couldn't really charge people the amount of time that it took.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah, so generally, when people get into astrology and they start to see these connections and these patterns that just show up consistently time and time again, like, after a while, the whole random coincidence factor just goes right out the window. And when you started to experience these kind of aha moments in astrology, what was that like for you?
Well, it was difficult, because prior to that I had been quite anti-astrology, and so I had to revise my entire way of thinking, which I did. And now, as you say, I don't see this as a coincidence, and in fact the clarity that astrology gives to the experience of daily life, both on the personal and the societal level, and indeed on the spiritual level, is so intense that you can't go back to saying, well, it all just happens because it happens.
And it's very hard to convey this to somebody who is a disbeliever or a skeptic, or just wants to put it down outright. I mean, it's one of these things that's really kind of living and organic, and you really have to kind of experience it on your own. And obviously you had a life shock, which sort of opened you up to be able to do this. What is your in all the years that you've been practicing astrology? What would be your best? And we have time to do this. You don't have to answer it in the 1 or 2 sentences. But what would be your best summarization as to what is the power behind astrology? What are we talking about to bring these aspects and these angles together in ways that make absolute perfect sense for people in their lives?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure if you're asking me, how does astrology work? Is that right?
Sort of. I'm actually trying to get at this from sort of more of I'm not really looking for a technical or I don't want to, I mean, we can flesh out the technical stuff, but there's something behind the levers and the pulleys of this that is driving the.
Well, I think, okay, right,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I think I'd have to go back to the ancient Greeks who believed in a world soul, as well as various other things that perhaps we don't believe in now. But the world soul, or the being, the anima mundi, as it's called in Latin, is like the consciousness that wraps the entire earth, and including the human beings, the animals, the plants, the stones, the air. And it's interconnected, it's deeply interconnected. And things that we experience as events, or tragedies, or relationships, or happiness, it's really a kind of unfolding of a very integrated pattern. And this very integrated pattern you have some control over, but by and large it's more like surfing. There's a big wave, and we can surf it or we can be swamped by it. And it's like surfing in that you have the opportunity to change the direction of your surfboard, but you don't have the opportunity to change the direction of the wave. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, and for me, I mean, that ties into sort of the some of the concepts around the noosphere and Teilhard de Chardin, and some of the things that I sort of ascribe to in terms of the sort of the back end, or the consciousness that pervades sort of the soul of the world as well. How do you deal with the fatalistic aspect of astrology? Like, for instance, I have a friend right now who's going through a major Saturn opposition, in their chart, and for them, it's like, they see that as a grind. They know they have enough working knowledge of astrology to understand that that's a negative aspect in some degrees. But how, in terms of riding that wave, and you've got a challenging aspect like that, how do you as an astrologer deal with it, and how do you as a human deal with that in your own life?
Well, as an astrologer, if you were consulting me, I would say that every experience that comes to your life is designed to bring into greater consciousness. This is karma, in the sense that you could have perhaps, had you been good enough, 100 years before, have looked at this person's chart and said, this type of experience is likely to happen at the age of whatever it is. It's a Saturn opposition, so maybe it could be any age, but it's not likely to be a Saturn return.
Right.
And as a person, I find it fairly difficult to deal with these things, because I still have a strong belief in our ability to achieve things. And one of the ways of achieving things is by restructuring your reality. Now, my reality has been restructured to a large extent by a study of astrology, so I now no longer believe that we can change everything. But what we can change is our own outlook on things. Now, it's a bit like pleasure and pain. Some feelings are interpreted by the human being as pain, most people. Other people may interpret that pain not as a pain at all, maybe even as a pleasure. So a person who is a long-distance runner may experience what perhaps you and I, who may not be long-distance runners, might think is a fairly painful experience. But the level of joy and pleasure that such people can gain out of these difficult experiences is like taking pain to another level and turning it into a joy.
Right.
And in some ways, I think we can do that with nearly all of the things that happen to us. Now, if we happen to be in Joplin and our house is wiped out and our family is wiped out and we've got broken legs, it's very hard to take a positive view. But maybe as time goes by, something really good comes out of this. I think perhaps let's imagine that we're a busload of athletes heading for the Olympic Games and the bus falls off a cliff. This is karma. The bus fell off the cliff. All of you lined up at that time to have a bus fall off a cliff in your life. Now, One athlete loses his legs and says, I can't live like this anymore, my life is finished. He commits suicide. Another athlete loses his legs. He falls in love with the nurse who looks after him and nurses him back to hospital. He marries her. He goes on to become a champion in the disabled Olympics. This is the person using the same kind of external event in a completely different way. One person allowed himself to be crushed by the wave or swamped by the wave. Another person was able to turn his surfboard in a slightly different direction. It's the same thing. He's still an athlete, but it's a different kind of athlete. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is that answering my question? Or is that
I think it actually expands the question a little bit more, and I think it's a terrific answer. I wanted to follow that up with: do you find that there are certain signs or signs with ascendants, or certain ascendants where people actually embrace conflict or embrace pain as kind of a way to transform their lives, or at least a touch into who they are in a significant way?
No, I've never really looked at that. I don't think I'd put that down to the ascendant, because you've got to look at you can't judge somebody by their ascendant. You have to look at the whole chart.
Right.
It's not possible to judge. But that's like sun sign astrology doing the whole thing. I mean, my sun sign is Cancer, but it doesn't mean that I fit every kind of nuance of the Cancerian character, nor would I want to. But my rising sign is Sagittarius. It's much more outgoing, much more, shall we say, looking on the other side of the head. So I don't know how you would judge it. I wouldn't judge it by a sign. I would judge it by the total pattern of the chart.
The character of the chart. The reason I bring that up is because I know of two individuals who are both Aries, and and I've seen them both, dive sort of headfirst into that kind of what some people would call conflict, or learning through pain, or learning through challenge. And other personality types. Myself, I've got a stellium of planets in Libra. It's like, I'm not necessarily conflict avoidant, but if I can find a softer way to get to someplace, I certainly would. Okay. But I've seen this in the Aries type, where it is, and again, I don't want to be superficial and just say all Aries are like this, but I've noticed that if there is a sign that certainly reflects this kind of dealing with conflict in a way that other people don't, I've certainly seen it in a number of Aries people that I know.
Well, Aries is certainly an aggressive sign, and a very good friend of mine, Neil Giles, who is writing astrology. As strangely enough, our lives have been really parallel existences. Now, he's an Aries, and this guy, nothing would stop him. But on the other hand, he had a very large swag of planets in his 12th house. So he's a psychic. He's also found himself constantly dealing with people from what might be described as the wrong side of the tracks, criminals, drug addicts, and so on. I don't know that you can say that Aries will charge at everything.
Right.
Problems, solutions, whatever, and they love the challenge. You can't win an Aries by boring them. You can't win anybody by boring them. But an Aries person is extremely dynamic, usually, and creative.
Yeah.
The Libran person is also a cardinal sign. So Libra is creative, not so dynamic, more harmonious, ruled by Venus, as opposed to being ruled by Mars. That's what those type of things mean. Mars, as a symbol, is action, violence, jumping over the fence. Venus is inviting people in, creating a nice environment, having beautiful music, not racing forward and trying to push the ball out of the paddock.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You get that?
Oh, absolutely. You touched on the 12th house a little bit in terms of your friend. I think the 12th house is fascinating. And one of the most misunderstood houses in the zodiac. I'd love to get your take on the 12th house and what you have experienced with your clients, and maybe with your own sort of 12th house transits that you might have gone through.
Well, at the moment, I've got my progressed moon going through the 12th house. Mm-hmm. It's not good.